Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS now for over 12 years. I sit within the thought leadership part of the knowledge and practice area of the organisation, and my role is to look at the impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 members worldwide, working right across the property life cycle through land, planning and development, construction, brokerage, valuation, finance, building and asset management, building surveying, and end of life. It's a really very broad canvas upon which data and tech is having a profound effect. And indeed, our members work across all the major asset types of land itself, residential, commercial, infrastructure, and alternative assets. And today I'm really glad to have Daniel Green join me from the Black Arrow. So welcome, Daniel.
Hi there, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure, pleasure. Now, before we get into the bits and bytes and what you're doing, it'd be great to have a bit of kind of a backstory on you and the origin story. And in fact, the question I'm desperate to ask is where does the name Black Arrows come from?
Right. Well, yeah, good question actually, and it's one I do get a lot. But it's very simply actually the red arrows used to be called the Black Arrows.
Right.
In the 1950s, they were known as the Black Arrows, and I think they decided to try and make it a little bit more family friendly sounding and maybe less aggressive. So, and they changed the name. And I kind of like that little bit of history, and coming from marketing myself, I kind of like the fact there was a little bit of a legend, as it were, as you'd say. And so I stole it and I used it. So there's been a couple of times I've bumped into older people from the RAF who've gone, oh, that's interesting, and they've sort of got the link, but yeah, no, it works, and yeah, so that's where it comes from.
Indeed, and you said your background was earlier in the kind of marketing side of things. How did you get into this fast-moving drone service sector?
Yeah, well, it is a long and winding story, but the succinct version is I've done sort of 15 years in global digital advertising and marketing, working on with global brands and media agencies and all sorts of weird and wonderful companies. And I basically, having moved to Devon, back to Devon, I didn't want to be stuck in front of a screen, and I looked at all these different areas that I could take my experience of working in accountability from a digital media point of view. And everything kind of pointed to working in social tracking or all sorts of different online things, and drones is something that sort of percolated up, and having being a frustrated pilot, should you say, or someone who tried to get into the RAF and realized I couldn't take authority, I was too dyslexic and my legs were too long and ultimately didn't become a pilot. And I thought, well, actually this is something I can do, but I was very conscious that most people were using drones to just take photos or video, which is all well and good, but that was at the time, about 8 years ago, that was already getting cheaper and easier. And I thought, well, that doesn't make for a good business case. So I then stumbled across someone that was using a very early version to capture data, and having worked with data in the broad sense from media and marketing, I understood data is knowledge is power, and people pay for power. So I was like, if I can use drones to capture data that is data of value, then I could see there is justifiable business there. And so for the last 7 years, that's what I've been focused on. And data has generally been the XYZ, the 3D, the topographical data of land, but it can also be heat loss data, it could be multispectral data looking at vegetational health and so forth. So I initially turned my business as a 4D surveys, being the 3D plus a layer of additional data that may be, again, thermal, it may be a multispectral or time. So you capture it at point A, 3 days later, 3 months later, 3 years later, you capture it again, and you're getting a fourth dimension of time. but actually it's about 60 if you were going to use all those things. But then you start getting a bit hard for people to try and understand what you're doing, and just sounds like a bit of marketing fluff, which I'm obviously hypersensitive to. So.
Indeed. And you've mentioned various kind of payloads there by implication in terms of the kind of things you're able to gather in addition to visuals. I mean, what sort of drones do you need to support those different kind of payloads?
So I've got a few behind me, but I think ultimately, I think a lot of people, I do get emails on maybe a weekly basis, fortnightly basis, from people going, oh, I want to start a drone business, or I've got a drone for Christmas, or I bought a drone from Argos or whatever, and I want to do this and this. And I think this is the challenge, is people get quite myopically focused on that single tool, and ultimately it's a toolkit. You've got various different tools in there. You can just have one tool, but there's no point trying to use a hammer to screw in I was going to say screw in a nail, then screw in a screw. So the drones that I have, obviously the majority of drones that people are aware of or have are what's termed as multi-rotor or quadcopters. So generally 4, they can have 6, 8 or more propellers. And those then are very useful. You can obviously hover with those. The larger ones, most people would be aware of DJI. So DJI, sorry. Those ones then can carry larger payloads, which can, like I say, can have a very high resolution camera, or can look at thermal. Some can monitor or spot methane, various other gases and so forth. So you've got those drones, but by their design, they are fighting gravity. So that although a lot of them will advertise like a 40, 50, maybe an hour flight time, in reality that is in zero wind without a payload. Generally, when they quote it, in reality you've only probably got half an hour. Yeah. And if that's for an inspection or something like that, then that of a building or something like that, then maybe that's fine. You can come down and pop a new battery. But when the majority of work I'm doing is very, very large scale, so you're talking 5, 10, 15, 20,000 acres of land, you can't be just airborne for half an hour. So the other types of drones that are used are fixed wing, so more traditionally looking like a plane. So they'll maybe have like a meter or so wingspan, and then they'll have a single propeller at the back which pushes it along. Those are great because they're using principles of flight to stay airborne, so they can stay airborne for longer. But what they can't do is hover. So it's if you're hovering one of those, then you're in big trouble. It's coming down. But yeah, so those have a variety of different payloads. So when you're looking at large areas, then generally I'm using the fixed wing. And if you're looking at inspections, or if you're trying to do, for example, like deer scouting, then we have a thermal all-weather drone that can go out as it's named in all weathers, and you can using heat signatures you can spot deer, and you can then help with counts and so forth. So yeah, so a lot of different tools in the toolkit. So
yeah, indeed. And based on that kind of variation and different tools in the toolkit, what kind of different kinds of clients are you working with?
So like I said, I've been doing this about 7 years, and so initially a lot of the work was coming from planners, planners, architects, few designers, and developers. And so a lot of like residential housing developers who maybe have got 50, 100 acres that they're then looking to understand the topography of the land. And a lot of the time it was pre-purchase. So where a traditional surveyor, if I can use that term, would need to come in, they need to walk all that, they need to measure hundreds and hundreds of points, and then produce a 2D topo. I could come in, I can capture it very, very quickly and have it back the same day. And so if that land was going to auction, the client had that knowledge, had that detail, which was of value. They knew they could pay more because they knew that they could fit more properties in it, or they knew actually they didn't want to pay as much. And so that had a value there. But actually in the last 3 years, as has been the global political shift to conservation, as with a political in a positive sense, money has shifted as well, which is a good thing, because that shifts momentum and actually helps change, you know. And so in the last 3 years, it's the focus and the majority of work that's been coming through has been from existing landowners or potential landowners, conservation businesses, rewilding, reforesting, afforesting, rewiggling is a new one, but firms that are organizations that either have got land or are looking to buy land and want to understand it. And again, because we're dealing at very large scale, this is where a drone can do a very high detailed job very swiftly in comparison to being on foot, and that's where we're at the moment.
Indeed, and it sounds like the value you're providing clients has moved, you know, above and beyond just the bricks and mortars, if I can use that phrase, in terms of buildings, and into this kind of this land at scale. I mean, from your perspective, I know you're based down in the West Country of the UK. Are you working right across the UK in terms of these sort of land parcels that you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the map behind me maybe shows a more dramatic expectation than the reality. But yes, it has been UK. I do occasionally get briefs abroad, but not quite that far. But yeah, mostly because at the moment there's a lot of land available in Scotland, Yorkshire, and in Wales. That has generally been the main pull. But it's majority big areas up in Scotland, which is kind of driven that, and the value that basically people are trying to get out of that is really trying to get that baseline, that day zero, either before they've purchased the land, again, to help inform that purchase decision, because we're talking, you know, double-digit millions in a lot of these cases, so they're not small small purchasing decisions. But yeah, so that's really where we're able to basically create this baseline, this day zero, that then when they come in and make these interventions, look at making changes, they can then track that impact over time.
So it'd be interesting to probe a bit more deeply about how these clients of yours are effectively working to combat climate change and looking at land, whether that's forestation or you mentioned biodiversity in terms of deer counts. Can you talk us through some of the kind of things you're working with these clients that are having this really positive impact on the environment?
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, I think to give it, I guess, context is, as I've mentioned, my background is not in this area, and so I'm always very conscious up front to not try to oversell what I'm bringing to the table, because I don't really, beyond the processing of the data into more than just raw, I'm not adding a layer of analysis. So I always just make sure that what I'm delivering goes straight into the workflow of an ecologist or a tree planting specialist, or a deer counting specialist or something like that. But yeah, so where I think, like I say, it's that day zero that I'm able to capture. And from there, that's where, because it's captured in accurate measurable 3D, so it's accurate down to a couple of centimeters anywhere on the globe. So the absolute accuracy is down to 2 or sub 2 centimeters. And then the level of detail is around, probably, again, depending on the site and the client's requirements, between 2 and maybe 4 centimeters ground sampling distance. So that's easily 10 times better than what you would have off Google Maps, and it's up to date as well. So yeah, but a lot of the time the clients then use this initially. It might be part of their due diligence before they purchase the land. So that's that job done. That's obviously provides a huge amount of value, again, when you're looking at double-digit million purchases. Once they have an estate, a site, they then got this high resolution 2D map, or they've got 3D models, point clouds, contour levels, so forth, that they can then plan from. So they can go, okay, let's have a look with the tree planting specialist, work out where we're going to plant, and then they can estimate and minimize wastage ultimately on where the trees are going to go and how many they're going to have. And then, you know, whether they're going to open up certain tracks, or whether they're going to again, this interesting term, rewiggling, which doesn't sound very professional, but it is a real term. I stumbled across it in conversation with a client, and that's ultimately taking, whether they're man-made rivers or existing rivers. I mean, I'm talking as a layman here, so I'm sure it's better than I, but it's ultimately rewiggling something that's pretty straight. And by doing that, you're changing the flow of water, slowing it down in parts, allowing ecosystems to catch hold and then evolve and then to bigger invertebrates straight up.
Exactly, yeah.
System can kind of like take hold and vegetation and so forth. So just helping that biodiversity, and again, that's then all measurable because we can come back once that's developed and refly, and then you've got a day 0 plus then day 500, 1000, what have you. And again, going back to the money, which can feel like a dirty thing, but ultimately this is why the political will is there, and now the money is coming in. I have a lot of calls, or a fair number of calls with private equity businesses that are they're talking huge figures into these funds, and it's there because the political will is there, because venture funds want to invest into these things. But with that sort of money comes accountability, and that again goes back to what I got into this for, is to be able to measure things, and in this case, measuring change, measuring impact in a positive sense. So this money would quickly dry up if you can't actually prove that you're having an impact, or you can't prove that you've got a way of measuring that. And that's kind of, again, that's where I'm kind of coming from, and that's how the clients are using it. But they tend to find that once they've got these 2D, 3D assets, there's other uses they can. Oh, actually, we can use that and look at the building condition surveys. They can look at, like, say, I had a message the other day from one of the deer managers who had used the map. So he'd gone out and had scouted for where the deer were and counted, and he had used my high-res 2D map as the underlaying map for placing where they were, rather than on a fuzzy Google map that was 5 years old or something. So these assets get used over and over again, and then again, once you've got layers from over time, then you've then got very very-rich data. You go beyond big data, and you go starting getting into smart data, where you can actually play with things that have been captured over time.
Indeed. And I think that's an important point you made there about that sort of accountability, because clearly you need that baseline, and then you need to measure over time and see the effect of these investments. Because you say, although the money and the political will is there is this accountability for capital that's being deployed in that way, isn't it? So.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's where it's, these conversations that I have with these firms are there at that, or some are in the space. One of their clients has bought 10 pieces of land and they're there now doing work. But these large private equity firms, they're going into pitch for this, and they want to show that they've got a strategy for reducing risk, for increasing efficiency, increasing knowledge and so forth. They need to be able to account for that from their day 0, which is way beyond going near any land, which is beyond getting those funds together, and be able to say and show that they would work with a firm like mine helps in that instance, and be able to give people the confidence that they are able to reduce risk and increase the efficiency of the work they're going to be doing. Because again, that's how money markets work, like it or not. Money moves in a quite an organic way, where profit or profitability, depending on how you measure that, and how efficiencies run and risk is minimized. So that's been quite interesting to kind of being exposed to that very very high level of how change is happening. But again, if you were just taking pictures and photos, you're then just doing marketing assets. It's not, yes, you can show there is now a forest where there wasn't one, but it's up for debate how big that is, what impact that is. But actually having takes it beyond semantics and makes it accountable, which is the key piece here.
So Daniel, you mentioned earlier about the the different kinds of drones and some of these sort of pros and cons of fixed versus rotor in terms of flight time and hover and stuff like that. I mean, in general terms, there are obviously, as you described, huge advantages of using this drone technology for this kind of work that you're doing. But are there any downsides? Are there any elements where you still need to use some other kinds of approaches to gather data?
Yeah, I mean, I think like with any tool in your toolbox, there's going to be the right tool, but it might be the wrong tool on that day or in that site, or ultimately depending on what the client's objectives are. You know, I've had briefs for sites, monstrous sites, you know, over 100 kilometers squared sites, but very, very remote in Scotland, and you kind of go, well, you know, are you going to be able to get the best, you know, even if it was doable at the dates that you want, you know, in the middle of winter, are you actually going to get the value you need out of that, or is it just too remote? And in some instances, you'll be better using a plane survey, which can be a lot faster, or using satellite. You can task a satellite, you know, that stuff that is certainly doable for our clients. So you want to task a satellite over an area, that can be done. You obviously still have the risk of cloud cover, but it's not as affected by localized weather. But those also have, you know, they will also have their disadvantages. With the plane survey, if you want the resulting models to be accurate, you'll need on the ground targets. So you'll still need to go onto site and place out targets and measure exactly where those are and merge that data after the fact. So it's not something that you can quickly click through your browser and order and then get back. Not if you want it to be sort of fully measurable and accurate. So certainly with clients, we've then looked at, again, coming back to what are you trying to get out of this, along with obviously budgets and so forth, but looking at those objectives and looking at what you're going to work with. And sometimes it can be a hybrid solution where maybe it's 95% of a vast remote area is captured by plane, and maybe instead of using targets and having to, you know, be out there for weeks placing targets and measuring, you can do a more select area with drone and then merge those two data sets and get the best of both. So yeah, but yeah, ultimately drones, you know, you're only realistically looking at 90 minutes. There are flight time. There are drones out there now that have, you know, up to 4 hours of flight time, but then you're getting into a very different classification of drone. There's a lot more restrictions out there from the point of view. It becomes you're getting much further into aircraft than drones, which are then closer to, dare I say it, toys. But you're getting into small vehicles versus big aircraft, and some of the ones that have like 4 hours flight time, you know, the wingspan's like 2.5 meters. So
yes, it's meant to be a light aircraft to some extent.
That's more succinct way. Yeah. So it's that's a very different category, and there's certainly firms out there that have them, and I think a lot of them, my sense of it is that they are getting more work outside of the UK because of the restrictions, whether you agree with them or not, that to get the best out of those kind of platforms, you want to be somewhere where you can fly at 300 meters, not limited to 120 meters as you are in the UK and most Europe, where you can actually benefit from that scale and those payloads. So battery time is still a limiting factor, but obviously you have multiple batteries, and then also weather does have a big impact. I've flown in some pretty strong winds and managed to get very, very good results. But although most of these drones, some of these big ones, they're about 20 grand a go, they are drizzle proof. But there's no point if you're trying to capture photos for photogrammetry, for mapping topography, there's no point trying to get a load of photos that have rain in them, because you're just reducing the quality of the input, which reduces the quality of the output. So so they're not 100% weatherproof. The one here which has thermal is to quite a high level, but that's again used for more spotting and used for SAR, search and rescue, so forth. So slightly different. So they're not, it's not the only solution, but it can be the best solution in many of the briefs that I'm getting.
Indeed. And finally, Daniel, as I quite often ask people on this sort of final point is in terms of sort of future horizon scanning, where do you see, this sector of drone services going in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as we know with technology, whether drones or phones or otherwise, they ultimately get more advanced and they get cheaper, or at least the jobs they do today will get cheaper. There'll be new things that they can do, which obviously keeps the premium up on the top end. But I think, yeah, ultimately we're seeing AI come in a lot more now. It has been around, but I found generally most of the drone manufacturers using it as a marketing bit of glitter, rather than actually using it fully. And of course, there is a lot. I mean, as we see through history, wars do drive innovation. I don't know if you could say it's a sad reality that we have to have wars, but it is a natural human evolutionary thing that happens out of wars. And with what's been going on in Ukraine, there's been a huge amount of money that's been driven into the drone industry, or more broadly speaking, because there's a realization from the military side of things that drones are genuinely a tool to be used. But as results, as is naturally resulting from that, when you get to the commercial side of the industry, a lot of that investment will peter down. So we're starting to see now through manufacturers like Skydio, who've had AI, but in a more onboard, limited sort of spatial awareness use. You're seeing that coming out more, which is not that much of a benefit if you're flying over large estates, because you're in the middle of nowhere and you're not right next to buildings. But when it comes to building surveys, that's very powerful. But also you've got sort of onboard intelligence with these drones that then can adapt to a changing scenario. So the wind picks up, of course it can come back on course. That's stuff that's been on there for a while, but to be able to do things that are more advanced than that can rather than capturing the data and then processing after the fact separately in a silo, as it were, they can process as they go, and they might the drone then may realize that actually it does, for this particular area, maybe it needs more photos, and so it can adapt in real time to ultimately optimize the resulting survey. So I think that's basically what we're going to be seeing, is that sort of that real-time evolution of the drones thinking about optimizing towards the end game, rather than I guess in a smarter way from my end. But I think then also equally, these drones are going to get cheaper. We're going to get the more interesting payloads. There's a new camera that's just come out from Sony, which is 61 megapixels, which is huge. Especially if you're flying, again, limited in the UK to 120 meters, you're then picking up flowers. You're going to be able to pick up, which is, for most of my clients, when you're talking about 10,000 acres, that's just too much. It's too much, and that's always a risk. That's why you've got to kind of always question the objectives. It's bigger, better, higher resolution is not always the end game. But anyway, they've just produced, so 61 megapixel cameras already exist, but as big, heavy DSLRs that I think are like a kilo, and they've just brought out one which is screenless, so it's intended specifically for drone applications. That will be quite expensive, but that is very exciting for the industry as a whole, because suddenly you've got, in a very compact form, very, very high res. And that, again, that's just going to be continuing to improve. And then back at base, software has really improved, cloud processing using AI as well to fill in gaps. So, okay, so maybe you've had an error, or there's been loads of wind on a tree canopy that's blurred certain shots or something like that, then you're going to see more intelligence in the software and how it processes that, and maybe fills in detail. You think from the 10,000 acre surveys I've done, that you're talking around about 50,000 photos. So there's a lot of data there that an AI could use to infill, if that was right for the brief, you know. So yeah, so definitely interesting things going there. We're constantly spending a huge amount of money on keeping it updated. Again, it's not always buying the latest thing because you have to. It's again looking at what the clients are after and what would benefit them, or if it's future clients that are slightly different. You know, is thermals something that's worth investing? It's been around for a while, but it's more accessible now. So again, a lot of the time with clients who ultimately are the end receiver of this, it's how will they benefit? Will they get the value? Because I spent years when I started banging my head, just speaking to architects, going, "What? I can capture this in 3D. Why can't you?" And it was just simply a case that they didn't have people in-house that could deal with it. So just because you can capture it doesn't mean that someone can actually get the value out of it that's worth that investment. So that's the thing. So always keeping an eye on what's coming through, and we do invest heavily. But yeah, certainly things like it's become very accessible now to use satellite comms, satcoms. So we have Starlink. So that has changed where we can operate, how we operate. I've done live video from a drone in the Highlands straight into a business conference to support a client and to help explain to their stakeholders why this estate should be invested into. It's beautiful, you know, and be able to do that with high bandwidth is completely changed how we can operate, and we can, you know, we can send files directly from in-field straight back to clients if they need anything. So that's really helped, and that's been something that's become really quite accessible in only the last 12 months. So that's always going to improve. So yeah, so there's lots of exciting areas to do it, but again, it always comes back to, is there enough of a benefit and a value to the current or future clients, and that's kind of how I've evaluated things.
No, I mean, I think it's a very powerful message, that, isn't it? That it is always about value. The data and tech is fascinating, but unless there's value there, it's not, you know, it's a means to an end, not an end in itself. And also very interesting that once again, AI seems to be just coming all pervasive now in terms of all the kind of technologies that people are using. Well, for today, Daniel, it's been fascinating. Thanks ever so much for your time, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. See ya.